We are looking at a very specific, very heavy kind of behavior today. The act of knowingly exposing someone to an incurable STD without telling them.
It is a heavy subject, but we are not just looking at the physical act or the medical consequences, though those are obviously serious. We are looking at the architecture of the person who makes that choice.
The character structure.
Exactly. Because that kind of behavior does not happen in a vacuum. It is not just a momentary lapse in judgment or a simple mistake. A decision to withhold life-altering information from a sexual partner reveals a massive amount about how that person views other human beings, how they handle power, and how they manage their own shame.
It raises the question of safety, not just sexual safety, but emotional and relational safety. If someone can do this, what else are they capable of? Are they safe to be around? Are they safe around children?
Those are the exact questions families and partners end up wrestling with when the truth finally comes out, because the betrayal fractures everything. When you realize someone looked you in the eye, acted affectionately, and actively hid something that could permanently alter your health, the ground just falls out from under you. You have to reassess every interaction.
Let us break down the mindsets driving this. The surface reasons people give are usually pretty predictable.
They are. A recent systematic review published in the Journal of Sex Research looked at 32 different studies on this exact issue. They found that only half or fewer of the people surveyed actually disclosed their status before having sex. The most common reasons they gave were fear of how the partner would respond and fear of rejection. They're afraid of losing the connection or the opportunity.
Self-preservation disguised as inevitability.
That is a good way to put it. They convince themselves that keeping the secret is the only way to keep the person. There is also simple denial. Some people do not want to fully face their own diagnosis, so they minimize it in their own mind. They tell themselves it's not a big deal, that they don't have symptoms right now, or that the risk of transmission is low. The research also highlighted that many people falsely believe that just using a condom is enough protection, so they feel absolved of the responsibility to actually speak the words.
You are controlling the conditions under which they are making a choice about their own body. That crosses the line from avoidance into manipulation. Manipulation happens when someone uses charm, pressure, emotional intensity, or carefully constructed silence to get access to someone else while hiding the very information that would change the equation. They steer the situation.
I want to pause on the silence aspect. Is silence always active manipulation? Because someone could just be paralyzed by shame. The Journal of Sex Research review mentioned stigma perpetuates massive shame and anxiety. If someone is frozen in fear, are they actively manipulating?
I hear the distinction you are trying to make, but I struggle to give a pass to silence when the stakes are this high. Even if the internal driver is shame or paralysis, the external result is still the denial of the other person's reality. The silence functions as manipulation because it relies on the other person's assumption of safety. If I know you are assuming the water is safe to drink, and I know it is contaminated, my silence is an active choice to let you drink it. I might be terrified of telling you, but I am still choosing my comfort over your safety.
The result is the same. The consent is voided.
Exactly. They may rush intimacy on purpose, knowing that once emotions are high, people are less likely to hit the brakes and ask for test results. They may act extra loving or emotionally overwhelming so the other person feels totally secure. That is not just a passive failure to speak. That is creating a false environment.
Which brings in deception. Deception is not always a direct lie. It is often a lie of omission.
It is carefully vague language. It is twisting the wording, saying, I'm clean or I'm fine, instead of answering clearly. It is creating a false impression while saying as little as possible. And the psychology behind this is fascinating and deeply unsettling. Studies looking at the dark triad traits, narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy, find strong correlations with sexual deception.
A study by Brewer and colleagues in 2019 found that Machiavellianism was strongly associated with lying to avoid confrontation and blatant lying in sexual contexts, while psychopathy was linked to self-serving deception. These are personality structures characterized by emotional coldness and a lack of empathy.
That lack of empathy is the core driver. They simply prioritize their own desires over the other person's well-being.
It is a selective empathy. They might show emotion. They might cry when confronted. They might say, "I was so scared to tell you," or "I didn't want to lose you." But notice what those statements do. They shift the spotlight entirely back onto themselves, their fear, their pain, their image. They do not sit with the anxiety they just forced onto the other person, the future doctor's visits, the betrayal, the potential lifetime health management.
The empathy vanishes the moment it conflicts with their agenda.
That is the defining feature. At the deepest level, the logic is my need matters more than your right to choose. That worldview reveals a terrifying level of entitlement.
Let us talk about the specific traits that cluster around this behavior. Entitlement is obviously one. What else?
Compartmentalization is huge. This is the ability to split yourself into boxes. In one box, you are the loving partner, the good person, the upstanding citizen. In another box, you are hiding a harmful secret and putting someone at risk. This is why a person can seem so affectionate while actively betraying you. They maintain multiple versions of reality.
I'm not sure compartmentalization is always that clean. People leak. The stress of holding those two realities usually shows up somewhere else. Do they really just switch boxes effortlessly?
Some do, and that is what makes them so dangerous. The ones scoring higher on those Machiavellian traits do not experience the cognitive dissonance the same way a healthier person would. But you are correct that it often bleeds out. It shows up in strategic dishonesty. They do not just lie about the STD, they shape reality through half-truths, controlled ambiguity, and timing. They rely on plausible deniability. They keep things just vague enough so they can backtrack later if caught.
An avoidant conscience.
Yes, they know it is wrong, but they avoid the discomfort of correcting it. They wait, they delay, they hope the consequences just never arrive. And that same style often shows up in their finances, their work obligations, how they handle legal problems. They leave other people holding the bag while they dodge the shame.
Image management becomes their primary defense mechanism because they cannot tolerate losing status or access. Instead of getting honest, they manage the perception. If they're exposed, they might smear the person who exposed them. They play the victim. They isolate people so stories do not get compared. It turns into reputation warfare. And they often engage in boundary predation. They test the waters first. They look for someone who is forgiving, maybe trauma bonded, someone who is slow to confront. They study where the fence is weak before they jump it. This leads us to the critical question about children. If a person operates with this kind of moral flexibility and deception, are they a danger to their kids?
The short answer is yes, potentially. Not automatically in the sense of physical abuse, but the character structure that allows someone to violate adult consent often spills into parenting. A 2024 study from the University of Toronto investigated parenting by lying. They found that children exposed to parental lying experience higher rates of anxiety, depression, and poor attachment in adolescence and adulthood. They also found that these children are far more likely to become liars themselves. Another study from Nanyang Technological University found that even when parents tell white lies to spare feelings, it still encourages the children to lie once the children realize they've been deceived.
So the deception normalizes a distorted reality for the child.
It fundamentally breaks the child's compass. If a parent is driven by image management, chronic deception, and a weak conscience, the child grows up in an emotional fog. They might be gaslit. They might be made responsible for the parent's moods. They learn that getting what you want matters more than honesty. A parent who cannot respect an adult's physical boundaries is highly likely to dismiss a child's emotional and physical boundaries.
Exactly. The child lives in a world of mixed messages, and a deeply manipulative adult will absolutely use children as tools. They use them for leverage, for emotional buffering, to punish the other parent. The danger is not the STD itself. The danger is the disregard for others, the coercion, the inability to put someone else's well-being first.
How do you assess someone like this? If they can be charming and affectionate, how do you see the real structure?
You stop looking at their charm and you start watching their patterns in 4 areas: truthfulness, empathy, accountability, and boundaries. Do they tell the truth when it costs them something? Do they protect people from harm? Or do they only protect themselves from consequences? Do they take accountability without spinning a story? Do they leave a trail of confusion and broken trust behind them?
I keep getting stuck on the idea that they can be loving in moments. Can someone be genuinely loving in a moment, but fundamentally unsafe overall? Or is the love just another manipulation tactic?
That is the hardest thing for victims to process. The affection might feel real to the person giving it in that specific second, but love as a sustaining action requires respect and protection. If I hug you warmly and then hand you a poisoned drink, the warmth of the hug does not negate the poison. The affection is compartmentalized. They can be fun, generous, and spiritual sounding, but if they lack accountability and bypass consent, they are structurally unsafe.
The worldview is the issue. A responsible person accepts the cost of truth. A manipulative person manages the situation.
That is the defining line. It is a way of handling power and a way of handling consequences. When children or vulnerable people are in the blast radius of that worldview, the damage is generational.
We have to look past a single act and see the entire way a person operates in the world. The patterns always reveal the truth, even when the words do not. Pay attention to the fog.
The research on deception, the studies on parental lying, all of it points to the same conclusion. Character is not what someone does when it is easy. It is what they do when the truth threatens their desires.
Send this episode to someone who needs to hear it. Trust your intuition, watch the patterns, and protect your peace.